It all started back in 2014 when Sandra, 27, and I, 26, had been together for 5 years, with 2 years of marriage under our belts. Our paths crossed during our college days. She was pursuing accounting, and I was studying mechanical engineering. Our initial meeting occurred at a social gathering thrown by a mutual acquaintance, and we immediately connected. Following a few dates, we decided to make it official, ultimately tying the knot a year later. Sandra had an elder sister named Serena, who was wedded to Arnold, a close friend of hers. However, the real obstacle we faced was Sandra's mother, Isabella, who never approved of me. Right from the start, she sought out reasons to try and create a rift between us. It was evident that I never understood why I didn't like myself. She would constantly tell me that Sandra deserved better, or that I wasn't good enough for her. It was humiliating and slowly eroded my self-esteem, even though I believed I had the perfect life. Sandra was amazing, beautiful, intelligent, and the most incredible woman I had ever met. I had a respectable income as a mechanical engineer, and we were in a good place. We had decided to hold off on having children for now, preferring to travel and pay off the house first. Sandra was on board with this plan, and she even mentioned pursuing a master's degree, which I supported wholeheartedly. I just wanted to be there for her. Then, a year into our marriage, everything changed. Sandra's mother, Isabella, had a fall and had to be hospitalized for a few days. Though the doctors assured us it wasn't severe, they recommended she rest in bed. Sandra was beside herself with worry, and I could see how deeply her mother's health was affecting her. Sandra decided to stay with Isabella during her recovery period, and I was left. Anticipated that we could have spent more time together. However, the anniversary party threw me for a loop. Sandra's parents were celebrating their 30th wedding anniversary, and the evening brought 2 shocking announcements that left me feeling overwhelmed. Firstly, Serena, who had struggled for years to conceive, bravely revealed that she had been unable to become pregnant despite numerous fertility treatments. The pain of her unfulfilled desire for children was evident in her tear-filled eyes as she shared her heart-wrenching news. In that moment, I wished I could ease her suffering, though I knew it was beyond my power. The second bombshell came from Isabella, whose usual emotional distance made her confession all more startling. With tears streaming down her face, she opened up about her intense yearning to become a grandmother. Her words carried a sense of urgency and weight that struck me to the core. The vulnerability of these revelations made me realize the fragility of life, with uncertainties lurking around every corner it's possible, she said, her voice quivering. I had watched her grow up, and now all I wanted was to witness her starting a family. Glancing at Sandra, I could see the shock written all over her face. Her complexion was ashen, her eyes wide, and her hands shook as she reached for her wine glass, but it seemed to offer her no solace. Her mother's words had clearly touched her deeply. After the party, as we returned home, Sandra was visibly affected by the evening's events. She was quiet at first, lost in her thoughts. I tried to give her some space, but eventually, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Sandra," I said gently, sitting next to her on the couch, "are you all right?" Her teary eyes met mine. I don't know, Alex," she whispered. I just don't know. Is it your mom?" I asked cautiously. She nodded, her voice breaking. "She's right though. She won't be here forever. And Serena? She's struggling. I don't know what to do." I reached out and enveloped her in a tight hug, reassuring her that we didn't need to make any immediate decisions. We would figure things out together. Despite my comforting words, I couldn't shake the sense that something had changed after Sandra's mother's plea for grandchildren. The weight of that request seemed to be taking a toll on Sandra, and I felt a shift in our relationship. Ignoring the situation was a mistake that I now regret, but I couldn't bring myself to confront it at the time. As weeks turned into months without any significant progress, a sudden urgency gripped me when I received a distressing call from Sandra. Her voice quivered as she spoke, informing me that she was at the hospital with Serena, who had attempted to harm herself. I felt a surge of fear as I asked if she was okay, realizing the severity of the situation. Sandra reassured me that she was fine, But Serena was in critical condition. Pleading for my help, he didn't waste a moment. "I'm on my way," I declared, attempting to sound composed despite my inner turmoil. Hastening to the hospital after work, my thoughts raced as I tried to make sense of the situation. Upon my arrival, I noticed Sandra in the waiting room, her face drained of color, her eyes red from crying. Isabella, off to the side, wore a distant and almost accusing expression. A tense atmosphere gripped the room, and Isabella's unwavering gaze felt particularly unsettling. I moved towards Sandra, embracing her tightly in an attempt to offer comfort. Yet Isabella's critical stare lingered, making me uneasy. Arnold, Marco, and Isabella's husband were also present, their restless demeanor adding to the somber mood. However, it was Isabella's aloof demeanor that left the most lasting impression on me. I found myself shouldering the blame, even though I couldn't grasp the reason for it. "What's going on?" I inquired, speaking softly in an attempt to comprehend the situation. Sandra's voice quivered as she explained, "It's about Serena's infertility, Alex. She has been battling it for years. Mom's remarks about wanting grandchildren pushed her over the edge. The pressure became too much for her to bear." A wave of sorrow washed over me as I reflected on Serena's pain. I couldn't fathom the depth of her struggles, but I empathized with the immense hurt she must have felt. 2 days later, Serena was discharged from the hospital, still shaken but physically stable. The doctors had prescribed antidepressants to assist her in managing the aftermath. The entire family convened at Isabella's house to address the situation. Tension hung in the air, laden with unspoken sentiments and uncomfortable glances. As we gathered in the living room, the conversation inevitably turned to the topic of grandchildren. Serena's infertility remained a raw and painful subject for everyone present, and Isabella's words from the recent party were on the brink of discussion still lingering in the background. I paused for a moment, fully aware of the potential controversy my suggestion might provoke. Despite that, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was the right thing to propose. "Have you considered the possibility of adoption?" I tentatively inquired, attempting to maintain a composed tone. I suggested that exploring adoption with Arnold could offer a wonderful opportunity to welcome a child into your lives, even if they may not be biologically related. Adoption is a valid path to parenthood that can bring immense happiness. A heavy silence filled the room as all eyes turned towards me. Although I sensed my proposal was met with disapproval, I persevered. Isabella's gaze narrowed, a clear sign of her incredulity. "Adopt a child," she remarked sharply. "It's not the same as having a grandchild with our blood, a true descendant of our family." Her words felt like a sharp rebuke, and I struggled to mask my disappointment. My suggestion wasn't made out of ignorance for the significance of blood ties in a family. Rather, I saw adoption as a potential source of joy for Sarah. And Arnold had finally been given the opportunity to build the family they had always dreamed of. Isabella, however, was not receptive to their excitement. The conversation came to an awkward halt, and no more suggestions or ideas were put forward. The tension in the room became almost tangible, weighing heavily on everyone present, including me. We all soon departed, and Sandra's silence indicated she shared my frustration. In the ensuing weeks, things began to shift. Serena and Arnold started coming to our house more frequently, though their visits felt peculiar. They would engage in whispered conversations in the kitchen, but once in the living room, they fell silent. Their behavior seemed odd and secretive, causing a sense of discomfort. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were concealing something from me, leaving me unsettled and unsure. I decided to not dwell on it too much, pay attention to the beginning. It's possible that Serena was simply going through a difficult period and needed her sister's support. However, there was a noticeable shift in Sandra's behavior. She started becoming more secretive with her phone, often concealing it when I entered the room. When I tried to approach her after work, she distanced herself, causing our once strong, intimate life to dwindle. Our communication deteriorated, but I couldn't pinpoint the exact issue. Then came July 5th, a day that's etched in my memory. Upon arriving home from work and seeing multiple cars parked outside, I felt a wave of unease. Inside the house, I was met by my in-laws, Serena and her husband, Arnold, all with serious expressions. Sandra, her voice strained, instructed me to sit down as everyone's eyes fixed on me. Awaiting a conversation that seemed ominous, I felt the anticipation building up inside me, causing my heart to race. "What's going on?" I inquired, but my mother-in-law, Isabella, interrupted me sharply. "What solution can you offer us?" she demanded, her tone cutting. Confused, I asked, "What are you referring to?" Isabella's eyes narrowed as she glanced at Sandra before responding icily, "Regarding your grandchildren." A wave of frustration and bewilderment washed over me. I don't understand," I stuttered. Ignoring my question, I tentatively suggested something that had been on my mind for a while. Perhaps we should consider exploring in vitro fertilization. It may not guarantee anything, but it could be a potential option. Isabella's immediate reaction was one of disgust, her face contorting in disapproval. Her age-old judgment was evident, and it was clear that my suggestion did not sit well with her. With a final shake of her head, she muttered, "No, no, no," before looking up with a gleam of cruel certainty in her eyes. As the tension grew in the room, I considered another solution. My mind raced as I stared at Sandra, seeking reassurance that was not forthcoming. Instead, her focus was on Serena and then her mother. Serena's smile seemed unwavering, while Arnold's smug expression only added to the stifling atmosphere. His air of superiority was impossible to ignore as he relaxed in his chair. Uncertain of what was about to happen, I remained silent, waiting for Sandra to speak. Yet she stayed silent, her unreadable expression fixed on the floor. Abruptly, she snapped, urging me to say something. Her sharp words left me reeling, unable to comprehend her anger. I hesitated before responding, struggling to make sense of the situation amidst the suffocating silence. And then, with an unsettling calmness, Isabella began to speak, stating, "As you know." She began, her eyes fixed on Sandra. "Serena is unable to give us grandchildren due to a curse that has befallen her, denying her the joy of motherhood." Her voice tapered off, filled with judgment. Sandra cut in abruptly, stating that they had explored other options, her tone tense with an indiscernible emotion. She explained that surrogacy was fraught with risks, particularly concerning genetic and hereditary implications for future generations. Exhaustion weighed heavily in her features as she shook her head. Arnold, always eager to voice his opinion, added that surrogacy was financially unfeasible given their current circumstances. Feeling overwhelmed but determined not to be overlooked, I interjected, probing, "So what exactly are you suggesting?" Despite my attempt to sound composed, a sense of turmoil brewed within me. Suddenly, Isabella's words pierced through the tense atmosphere. "Since you are unwilling to have children, Sandra will bear Arnold's child instead." I was frozen in shock as the world around me seemed to come to a standstill. I was in disbelief as the words echoed around me. With each beat of my heart, the reality of the situation sank in deeper. Sandra, my wife, pregnant with Arnold, my brother-in-law. I stared at her, searching for any glimpse of explanation in her lowered gaze. The weight of her confession hung heavy in the air between us. Everything seemed to come to a standstill as my mind raced to process the unthinkable news. My voice seemed to fail me as I struggled to form words, my mind clouded with hope that this was all a cruel joke. Yet the undeniable truth lingered in the air, crushing my hopes. In a chillingly composed tone, my mother-in-law continued, suggesting a plan that chilled me to the core. The shock held me captive as she coldly outlined their intentions regarding the unborn child. Every word she spoke drove a deeper wedge of disbelief into my already shattered reality. I searched desperately for an escape from the nightmare that was unfolding before me, praying for it all to be just a terrible dream. But as the conversation continued, each word a dagger through my heart, I realized the harshness of the truth that now lay bare before me. Now, children are not commodities, she proclaimed, her sanctimonious tone emphasizing her belief that they should be conceived out of love and not manufactured in a lab through artificial means. She stressed the importance of conception through natural means, specifically through sexual intercourse between a couple. Her words lingered heavily in the room, each one more oppressive than the last, as she delved into religious arguments against artificial methods of conception, citing the church's prohibition and her fear of her grandchild facing condemnation. I reached my breaking point, feeling suffocated by her words and unable to tolerate the insanity any longer. Without hesitation, I rose abruptly from my seat, fists clenched at my sides, and exclaimed, "No way." It was uncharacteristic of me to raise my voice, but I needed to convey my dismay. I demanded answers from my wife, Sandra, who was caught between confusion and fear and remained silent, refusing to speak, and then it dawned on me with a force I had never experienced before. She wasn't on my side. She wasn't advocating for me. Isabella, my mother-in-law, gazed at me obstinately. Despite being taken aback by my sudden outburst, she persisted in her attempt to rationalize her position, expecting me to comprehend. Unyielding, I refused to accept her explanation. Arnold, who had remained silent until that moment, approached me and reached out to touch my shoulder. "Don't touch me," I snapped, recoiling as my fury reached its peak. With an even more condescending tone, my mother-in-law stated, "We respect your choice to not have children. However, we recognize your youthful desire for exploration. Therefore, the responsibility will fall on Arnold." I was stunned. The words she spoke seemed incomprehensible. She went on to explain that as per Serena's wishes, her grandchild should be conceived through an act of love, and that Arnold and Sandra would be the chosen participants. I was in disbelief. Everything seemed surreal. And that's when I completely lost control. "You're insane, you old witch!" I screamed, my voice quivering with rage. The room fell eerily silent as my outburst hung in the air. Serena gasped. Sandra's expression shifted from anger to something ambiguous, perhaps regret or guilt. It was hard to discern. Arnold, who had been silent until that moment, just smirked at me. "Oh, come on," he patronizingly urged. "It'll be a blast." That was the final straw. Without even realizing it, I lunged at Arnold, my fist making contact with his face in a powerful blow that sent him to the ground. Chaos erupted in the room. Serena and Sandra started to scream, their voices blending into a cacophony that drowned out everything but the adrenaline rushing through my veins. "Get out of my house!" I bellowed, my throat raw with fury. Without waiting for a response, I stormed off into the bedroom and slammed the door shut behind me. Their shouts echoed through the house, but I couldn't hear over the pounding of my own heart. Moments later, I witnessed them exiting through the window as the door suddenly swung open. Sandra stormed into the room, her flushed face bearing her anger, along with a hint of hurt that I chose to disregard. "You insulted my mother," she yelled, her voice quivering with emotion, dismissing their recent attempt at persuading me to allow her to be with Arnold. Indifferent to their motives, I couldn't remain silent any longer. "You're overlooking the fact that they're manipulating me into approving your relationship with your brother-in-law," I retorted, my voice strained from arguing. Sandra met my words with a fierce glare, opting for silence for the remainder of the day. Later, upon returning home following a day with my supportive best friend, Elliot, who had been my pillar of strength, offering a listening ear and words of encouragement, I was confronted with reality once again. "This is deceitful, Alex. Your mother-in-law holds the responsibility for all of this," he condemned, shaking his head in disappointment as I nodded, feeling the overwhelming weight of the situation bearing down on me. Once more it became clear that my mother-in-law was at the heart of the chaos. Elliot proposed an idea that seemed absurd initially but resonated with me later on. He suggested, "Perhaps it's time to leave the city, Alex. Take Sandra with you. Distance yourselves from this turmoil. The less exposure you have to her family, the less impact they will have on both of you." I had been contemplating this for days, grappling with how to ease the pain. It was a daunting suggestion, and I wasn't certain if I was prepared to flee from my problems. However, as I pondered further, the idea of escaping from her family's influence and the surrounding pressures began to appeal to me, despite my initial hesitations. Upon returning home that evening, I found Sandra seated at the kitchen table, her face flushed and tear-streaked. She had been weeping. I halted in my steps at the sight of her, overwhelmed with guilt and uncertainty about how to address the situation. "Sandra," I called out softly. She lifted her gaze to meet mine, her eyes brimming with tears. "My mom has been hospitalized." She shared. "She told me Serena is paralyzed with conditions," she said, her voice shaking. I responded without thinking, "That woman can perish." I wished for a painful demise for her. The bitter, cold words slipped out, and I saw the pain in her eyes. It was a moment I regret. Sandra crumpled, overcome with emotion. I watched, feeling a pang of guilt. My bottled-up emotions had spilled over, and I couldn't control myself. "I didn't mean to hurt you, but I struggled to respect your mother," I explained. Sandra wiped away her tears and locked eyes with me. "You don't understand, Alex," she whispered. "Serena is still battling depression. I fear for her safety." Serena's mental health was fragile, and I felt ill-equipped to handle it. After a brief silence, I offered, "Let's try. Let's start a family. Our baby in your arms." I couldn't bring myself to say more tea, but I had no choice. Sandra looked at me, her face brightening. With a soft smile, she reassured me, "It's all right. We'll give it a try soon." Yet deep down, I realized it wasn't just about her happiness. It was also about maintaining harmony with her family. This inner conflict unsettled me, but I couldn't turn back now, not when she gazed at me with such hope. In the following days, there was a subtle shift in Sandra's demeanor. She became more affectionate, more loving, and less distant. Her interactions softened, and she no longer kept her phone away from me. I noticed her random smiles aimed at me, and it felt like falling for her once more. Despite this newfound closeness, there lingered an indescribable unease within me. It was a peculiar feeling, one that I couldn't quite define or trust. As 6 months went by, I found myself unexpectedly entwined in a deeper bond with Sandra than I had imagined. How it occurred remained a mystery to me, yet my love for her seemed to deepen beyond my control. She desired, and I provided. If she requested a new TV, I bought it. If she wished for a day at the spa, I made the arrangements. I can't pinpoint the exact reason for my actions. Perhaps it was out of guilt or a deep-seated desire to atone for past indiscretions. Regardless, Sandra's happiness took precedence in my life. Surprisingly, Isabella, my mother-in-law, had ceased her request for grandchildren, and Serena appeared to be on a positive trajectory, outcomes I hadn't anticipated. Whether it was due to casual conversations or simply the passage of time, I was grateful for the alleviation of pressures. A surprise awaited Sandra, a heartfelt gesture I had been saving for, intended to demonstrate my love and commitment to our relationship. The plan had been meticulously crafted, with the aim of starting anew. On February 20th, clutching the tickets tightly, I crossed the threshold into our home. Upon my return, the silence that greeted me was palpable, stirring thoughts that perhaps Sandra had. I had just stepped out for a brief moment, but when I returned upstairs, a sense of unease washed over me. Upon entering the bedroom, my eyes fell upon a note resting on the bed. A heavy weight settled in my chest as I recognized Sandra's familiar handwriting. The note expressed her enduring love for me and acknowledged the strain our relationship was under due to her mother's desire for a grandchild. Sandra revealed her plan to leave town with Arnold to start a family, sparing me and Arnold unnecessary stress and heartache. It was a difficult decision, yet Sandra believed it was the right path for all involved. We will be away for a month. Please refrain from trying to reach us during this time. I will be in touch once I am pregnant, but please know that this will not alter our relationship. Let's maintain the facade that nothing has changed. Our family is unaware of the situation, and it is best kept that way. This will be our secret. Upon reading these words, I found myself stunned and overwhelmed with a mix of sorrow and embarrassment. The pain was profound, unlike anything I had experienced before. However, this moment also brought clarity. Our relationship lacked trust and mutual understanding, existing solely to meet her mother's expectations. I was not only furious but also ashamed of allowing myself to be taken advantage of by Sandra, while her mother pulled the strings from afar. I had been deceived into believing in a love that was never genuine. Over time, the sorrow transformed into apathy. It took only 2 days for me to realize this newfound truth: Sandra and her mother had deftly manipulated the situation, leaving me feeling like the submissive husband who forgave everything. I despised myself for allowing it to continue, but I was no longer willing to be treated this way. Determined not to remain silent, I drove to Sandra's parents' house, mentally preparing myself for the confrontation ahead. Disappointed to find their cars gone, I realized they had already left, as stated in the note. The carefully orchestrated plan intensified my sense of shame, and I returned home feeling frustrated and embarrassed. Overwhelmed by the situation, I called Elliot, who answered with concern in his voice. Taking a moment to compose myself, I admitted, "No, I'm not okay. Sandra is gone. It's like we were never married. She's planning to have a baby with Arnold and me." I halted myself before saying more. What was the use? Elliot let out a deep breath. "That's a terrible betrayal. What do you plan to do?" I had no answer, feeling utterly lost. "I don't know, Elliot. Truly, I don't know." We opened a couple of beers, sitting in silence as the weight of the situation sank in. After a few more drinks, he asked again, "What's your plan, man? Seriously?" Without even looking at him, I replied, my eyes fixed on the table, the beer now warm in my hand. "Nothing. I'm not taking any action. I don't even want to search for her. I just want it all to end." Later, I tried calling Sandra, but she had intentionally left her phone behind. I wasn't surprised. I knew she did it on purpose. It was just another way to prevent me from reaching out, preventing her from receiving answers. I seized her phone and reviewed the messages. Everything appeared normal, with no red flags. Interactions with her family, updates on her mother's health. It all seemed insincere. Throughout the weekend, I simmered in anger, the feeling intensifying by the minute. The deception, the manipulation, it cemented my disdain for Sandra and her relatives. I struggled to fathom the truth. My wife, Sandra, had been carrying on an affair with her brother-in-law, Arnold, for months. Their flimsy excuse about fertility issues was laughable. They had connived behind my back, and I felt a deep sense of betrayal. I wondered if I could ever look at them the same way again. Unable to bear it any longer, I resolved to leave. I devised a plan, purchasing tickets to Canada, packing my belongings and selling my car. The house was rented for the next 6 months, so I liquidated valuable items for cash, closed all of our individual and joint accounts, ensuring that I did not leave my partner with any money. I canceled all the cards, changed the insurance policies, and completely cut Sandra out of my life. I had saved enough money to sustain myself for 3 months during this transition. I reached out to Elliot for a loan, and he readily agreed, emphasizing the importance of taking care of myself and staying in touch. Knowing I could rely on him, I secured the loan. I took Sandra's phone with me, resigned from my job, and made it clear that I did not want any contact, even from my wife, due to the betrayal I experienced. 3 weeks into my fresh start in Canada, I received a WhatsApp notification on Sandra's phone from a family group chat labeled "Baby." Despite hesitating, curiosity led me to open the message, where I discovered something heartbreaking. Serena had shared the news that after more than 20 attempts, they were finally going to have a grandchild. Clicking on the photo, I realized that Arnold was. Sandra stood smiling beside the bed, where she lay wearing only her underwear, indicating they had been intimate. The next image revealed a positive pregnancy test, showing that Sandra was carrying Arnold's child. My world shattered as I processed this information. Feelings of anger, sadness, and humiliation overwhelmed me. I was in Canada now, too far away to turn back. The situation was too painful to face, and I knew there was no going back to Sandra after everything that had transpired. Constant messages flooded in, with Serena offering congratulations, Arnold declaring we finally did it, and my wife, Sandra, caught in the middle of it all, living a life that felt unrecognizable to me. Seeking distraction, I focused on finding work in Canada. Utilizing my engineering background and language skills, I secured a job as a warehouse worker in a small factory. Though not glamorous, it provided enough to survive and offered a respite from the deceit and betrayal surrounding my former life and my previous life. A week into my new job, I woke up one Sunday morning to a message from Sandra on my phone. It read, "Love, I'm back home. Everything went smoothly, and I'm expecting. Please come soon. I have something important to tell you." I stared at the message for a moment, feeling a mix of emotions. Despite all that had happened between us, she believed I would easily return to her. I chose not to reply. Instead, I spent the day wandering around Toronto, attempting to clear my mind and avoid thinking about her and the tangled situation I had left behind. However, more messages soon followed. "Darling, please come home. We must discuss this situation. Additionally, the bank accounts are empty, and the cards are not working. I need funds for groceries." I ignored these messages as well. I firmly believed that her brother-in-law and the other individual she mentioned could assist her financially without my involvement. As I continued walking, seeking solace, Sandra's persistent messages felt like a persistent thorn in my side. Soon the calls started coming in, displaying names such as Serena's and Arnold's on my phone screen. I simply rejected these attempts at communication. The notifications kept coming all afternoon, with Sandra, Serena, and Arnold reaching out to me, but I felt numb to their pleas. Unexpectedly, my father called, his voice catching me off guard. "Alex," he said tensely, "we need to address this. Your mother is worried. Why are you shutting everyone out?" I was at a loss for words. I hadn't talked to him in weeks. "Dad, please, just let it be. I can't continue this. I'm done," I replied. After a pause, he urged me to reconsider, emphasizing that it was a family matter and that I needed to come home. My mind raced, coming back to the home that was no longer whole. Despite my resistance, my father persisted in trying to reason with me. "Son, think it over. Your mother wants to support you. We can work through this together." The notion of fixing things seemed impossible to me. Sandra had made her decision, and I had made mine. I had decided not to revisit that situation. But the message was evident after ending the call. Even my father had stepped in now. It had been days since I had communicated with any of my family members, and his prompt outreach caught me off guard. Shortly after, he called again, and I took the opportunity to divulge the entire ordeal to him, including the betrayal and the disturbing message from Sandra. I also shared the WhatsApp chat images with him. Initially, he appeared skeptical, struggling to comprehend the gravity of the situation. "Are you saying she was involved with Arnold, your brother-in-law?" he asked, his tone reflecting disbelief. "Yes," I affirmed. "She's carrying his child. It's the truth." There was a prolonged silence before my father responded, expressing disbelief and urging me to stand by my decision. "You're better off without that conniving Alex. I stand by your side. If they attempt to contact you again, I will handle the situation my way," he replied firmly. "No, I'm not going back. I have no intention of dealing with them any longer." I assured him that I would be bringing him to Canada soon and asked him to block Sandra from contacting him. I made it clear that I wanted to cut ties with that side of the family. For the following 15 days, I switched off my phone to avoid hearing from anyone, including Sandra and her family. Once settled in Canada, I purchased a new phone and set my social media accounts to private. Instead of removing Sandra and her family from my friends list, I simply hid them to prevent their messages from bothering me. One day, my closest friend Elliot messaged me, informing me that Sandra had visited him seeking answers. Elliot shared that Sandra had come to my door looking for me. He told her to ask me herself, mentioning her affair with her brother-in-law, before closing the door and threatening to call the police. Learning about this encounter with Sandra brought me some peace of mind. It brought a small sense of satisfaction, knowing that someone had confronted Sandra on my behalf. Elliot described her as a wreck, which came as no surprise. She had made mistakes and now had to face the repercussions. 2 weeks later, I switched on my phone, only to be greeted by a flood of over 100 messages and missed calls, mostly from Sandra. Her messages were filled with pleas. "Alex, please, I still love you. This doesn't mean anything. I want us to have a child together." This is for my sister. Please don't ignore me. I love you." Despite her desperate and pleading voice in the audio messages, I remained unmoved. I had already made up my mind. Then there were the angry messages from my mother-in-law, accusing me of irresponsibility and selfishness, warning me that I could jeopardize her grandchild's future. She claimed Sandra was deteriorating due to stress, even being hospitalized for a nervous breakdown. But I was unfazed. I chose to block her number. I hesitated to respond to anyone initially, but as time passed, I found myself beginning to heal. With my father now living with me, it brought a sense of relief to have him by my side as he adjusted well to life in Canada. Securing a better-paying job allowed me to live more comfortably, and things were finally looking up after a long period of struggle. Eventually, I accomplished something unexpected, obtaining permanent residency in Canada. This marked the beginning of a new life that I had built for myself from scratch. With the help of a good lawyer, the divorce proceedings were set in motion, with Sandra being served soon after. Evidence such as her handwritten note and WhatsApp messages were included in the divorce petition. Despite Sandra's attempts to reach out, I found her messages to be nothing but noise. Unfortunately, before I could share further details about the situation, the message ends abruptly. Andra suffered a miscarriage, resulting in the loss of the child. Isabella attempted to shift the blame onto me, suggesting that Sandra's depression, caused by my abandonment, played a role. Sandra had distanced herself from her own family, holding them responsible for pressuring her into starting a family with Arnold. It seemed that she was trying to evade responsibility, but I saw through it. Despite everything, Sandra persistently tried to locate me and reach out. She appeared to hope for my return, but I was not willing to fall into that trap again. One day, I received a video call from her. Although unsure why I answered, perhaps to check on her well-being or to see if any remnant of the woman I once knew existed, I was taken aback by her appearance. Sandra looked weary, her face reflecting not just physical but emotional toll. It was evident that the burden of guilt and the repercussions of her actions were beginning to weigh on her. She immediately sought to offer an apology, but I was reluctant to accept it. I kept my camera off, reluctant to. I stood firm in front of her, refusing to show any intention of reconciliation. I made it clear that our interaction would be brief. I emphasized that one's actions ultimately define their character, pointing out that she had made significant decisions without my agreement, mistakenly equating my love with blind compliance. I expressed disappointment in her lack of patience, indicating that we could have possibly been expecting a child by now if she had been more patient. I'd harbored strong feelings towards her mother, Isabella, wishing ill upon her and vowing to disrespect her memory by urinating on her grave when the time comes. The end of our marriage was attributed to her and her mother, a burden she would have to bear for eternity. I let her absorb my words before concluding that I had already begun moving on by initiating new relationships. Although I made it clear that I would never forget nor forgive her. Have you seen any of your grandchildren lately? As they say, you get what you give. I'm dealing with the consequences of my actions, and you're facing yours. I'd overheard her crying, but I couldn't help but feel somewhat disconnected. She revealed that the doctors had informed her that she wouldn't be able to have children anymore because her uterus was removed during surgery. It was a surprising turn of events. And while I didn't wish ill upon her, it wasn't my burden to carry. I ended the conversation without saying another word, and that marked the last time we spoke. This was back in 2019. I've been residing in Montreal since then, working on recovering from that chapter of my life, from her influence, and from it all. It hasn't been easy, but it has been necessary. The divorce proceedings went smoothly, and I was able to break free from her. There wasn't much to divide between us, and I was only required to pay alimony for a year. When the world came to a standstill in 2020, everything seemed to blend together. Days merged, and distinguishing reality became challenging. However, ultimately, these details no longer carry weight. It seems like a tale now, almost like fiction, and I wish it were not so. Share your thoughts in the comments below, dear listeners, and remember to like, share, and subscribe.